As thousands of fires ravage the Amazon rainforest, climate scientists question Brazil's environmental policies. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Leaders from South American countries who share the Amazon will meet next week on how best to fight the wildfires. Since January, Brazil's National Space Research Institute, which monitors deforestation, has recorded more than 40,000 fires in the Amazon region. That's about 3 football fields worth of trees falling every minute in the rainforest. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been critical of protections for the Amazon, calling them an obstacle to his country's economic development. Some of the fires may have been started by illegal clearing of the land. The Amazon spans 9 countries, including neighboring Bolivia, which is also battling its own fires. CGTN's Dan Collins begins our coverage from Taperas, Bolivia.
Well, donations are arriving to La Chiquitanía region of eastern Bolivia. As you can see here, a truck full mostly of water, and the volunteers are working alongside the armed forces and firefighters to unload it in the 35-degree heat of midday here. These are extremely dry conditions, and it's easy to see how these forest fires have spread so rapidly. But these people are working to put out what remains of those fires in different parts of this region. And some of these suppliers are also going to outlying villages which have suffered as a result of those fires, although no deaths have actually been recorded. Now, this environmental disaster, which has destroyed more than 1 million hectares, at least 1 million hectares of forest, has triggered also a political dispute between with environmentalists accusing President Evo Morales of basically promoting the burning of forest in order to expand pasture land and farmland in the area. He passed a decree earlier in July, which allowed slash and burn farmers to operate, environmentalists say, with a carte blanche, and they say that that has led to these tremendous fires, which is the result of slash and burn agriculture, fires created to clear land, which have clearly got out of control. Now, Evo Morales also suspended his election campaign earlier this week. It's for a 4th term, and the elections are due to take place later this year in order to deal with this national crisis. But clearly there's interest on both sides. One side from the cattle farmers who are looking to see this as positive, that they can expand pastureland, and others, on the other hand, the environmentalists who are saying far more than a human disaster, this has really been a disaster for the environment, and the impact on the ecosystem here has yet to be quantified. Dan Collins, CGTN, in Taperas, Bolivia.
For more on the Amazon fires, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Salvador, Brazil, via Skype is Felipe Milanez. He's a professor of humanities at Federal University of Bahia. Also with us from Sao Paulo is Claudio Angelo, a science writer and the chief communications officer of the Climate Observatory. Here in the studio, Sweta Chakraborty. She's a risk and behavioral scientist and expert on climate science. And from Florida, Rodrigo Constantino is an economist, author, and columnist for Brazilian media. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Claudio, let me start with you. There are thousands of wildfires burning right now in the Brazilian Amazon, as well as other parts of the Amazon as well. The latest news we have is that President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil has banned most legal fires for the next 60 days. But put this in perspective for us. How serious is the damage?
Well, the damage is quite serious right now. The total number of fires in Brazil as of yesterday, according to our Space Research Institute, INPE, we have 85,000 fires in the country. That's a 75% increase over last year, and the worst figure for the previous 7 years. In the Amazon biome itself, we have 45,000 fires, which is a 98% increase over last year, and also a record figure for the previous 7 years. Now, one thing that I guess it's worth bearing in mind is that we are not talking about wildfires, because we're talking about a tropical forest, and tropical forests don't always catch fire. It's sort of a rare incident. What we are seeing, it's mostly forest areas that have been cleared, mostly for pasture, that are being burned right now. Of course, you have a component of wildfire of those very fragmented forests that have dried up, mostly in their margins, because they're surrounded by pasture or agricultural land, and those forests are indeed catching fire.
Right.
But it's not the core of the problem. The core of the problem is the kind of fire that people, set alight to clean previously deforested places.
Okay, let me go to Rodrigo. Rodrigo, these fires in the Brazilian Amazon have become a major political controversy, not just in Brazil, but around the world as well. How is the government of President Jair Bolsonaro handling the political fallout from this?
Well, I guess not in the best way. Their reaction is not good at all. And I guess they put some more gasoline in the fire, at least in political terms. But I also think there is a lot of hypocrisy and opportunism in the critics. I think they are not that interested in the forest itself. They don't care if Bolivia has problems as well. They are using it to criticize the government. And I guess the radical left-wing icon Noam Chomsky made it clear when he confessed that the left should use it as an inflection point to unite and go after Bolsonaro. So I think there are too much, not ado for nothing, to use Shakespeare, because it's not nothing. It's important, it's a huge damage, but I think they are using it in a very political and cynical way.
Rodrigo, I get your point about this being used for political ends, but these fires that are taking place in Brazil right now, they do have consequences, not just for Brazil, but for the world in terms of the impact it could have on climate change, on greenhouse gases getting into the atmosphere, on the Earth's ability to absorb carbon dioxide?
Yeah, it is, but it is an international problem, but it's a sovereign of Brazil issue. And also, we need to keep in mind we need to set some priorities here. Of course, the environment and global warming could be something to be worried about, but we are talking about 23 million Amazon people living there, and 45% of them below the poverty line. So those people, including the Indians, they want progress. They want capitalist progress. They don't want to be kept as an exotic animal, so that we keep them living in the way they live right now, because it's nice for us to see them like this.
Felipe Milanez, what do you make of the point that Rodrigo just made, and that is that people who live in the Amazon, the indigenous peoples, that they want economic development?
Well, first of all, I disagree deeply from the opinion of Rodrigo. It seems that being away from Brazil makes him away from the facts and of the reality we are facing here. Bolsonaro is trying to appropriate the crisis and the destruction to push for more predatory frontiers to the Amazon. How come someone can call indigenous people as animal like Bolsonaro or Rodrigo, or tell from away what the Indians are thinking about? Bolsonaro offended indigenous people this way. He said that the indigenous people were responsible for the fires, and he tried to blame NGOs, the environmental agency. He's mocking of all of us, spreading pure hoax about what's happening in the Amazon. It's an extreme serious crisis we are facing here. It's criminal fire. How come Bolsonaro can pretend to stop the fire that he is sending messages every day for the rangers to put fire in the Amazon with a bill, like signing a bill that's saying there's no more fire in the Amazon from today? It means, was it allowed before? This is all pure criminal politics, criminal fires.
Felipe, very quickly, can Brazil have economic development and preserve the rainforests at the same time? Can it have both?
Of course, the great example is what was happening to the Amazon until today. We're controlling deforestation. There are many, many great projects going out inside the Amazon with indigenous people. You see, like Lush cosmetic company buying fruits from the Kayapó. There are thousands of good projects in risk right now. Indigenous people are by themselves having to kick out invaders from their land and are receiving death threats for that. They're trying to protect the forest, preserve, and develop. They are developing that way of developing.
Right.
They want to live in Miami. They want to live in their land and defend that land.
Sweta, let's look at the big picture here. With the notable exception of some countries, the big challenge of our generation is climate change, global warming. The Amazon has often been referred to as the lungs of the world because it absorbs so much carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. It also cools the earth. So how big a setback would it be if these fires continue?
The Amazon has such a critical role to play in keeping the planet cool and habitable. It is not what happens in the Amazon stays in the Amazon. The implications are global. That's true also for the Congo Basin, which is experiencing fires. We are part of a global weather system that meteorologists refer to as teleconnected. So there is no such thing as sovereignty when it comes to impacts that are going to affect the entire global citizenry. It's imperative we keep this in mind as we think about how we protect these natural resources that impact us all. The Amazon specifically is a carbon sink. So it holds about 1/6 of the carbon, and in a general normal year, it is responsible for sucking out 20% of emissions into the rainforest. That is such an important critical feature for our entire planet. And so if we don't turn the tide of what's happening in terms of deforestation, we are talking about this resource turning into dry savanna and no longer able to play that role that is often referred to as the lungs of the planet. So there's real worldwide implications that the global leadership needs to pay attention to. This is not the problem of Brazil alone.
And we are hearing that. Most recently, we heard it from the G7 summit. But listening to what you're saying there, what would the consequences of that be if large parts of the Amazon forest actually become a kind of woody grassland?
So we are already on track to higher degree warming than what was agreed upon by the Paris Accords. Right. So we needed to keep the world under 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We are going to reach 2 degrees Celsius on the path that we're on, not even including what's going on in the Amazon right now, before mid-century. What does that mean? It means the impacts that we're seeing around the world are going to intensify. They're going to become more frequent, more severe. And what are we going to do if we start to go down that path and reach 4 degrees by the end of the century? What does that mean for global human health, for the ability to just be outside, what we might experience in terms of heat stroke from being outside too long?
Right.
So these are real impacts.
Claudio, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, well, it's kind of sad because we thought we had gone way past that kind of debate whether you should, preserve the Amazon or whether you should develop the Amazon, because there is no conflict whatsoever. And I'll just give you a few data. Some figures. Brazil, between 2004 and 2012, reduced deforestation by 83%. That was a major accomplishment. And it got richer on the way. Agricultural GDP in Brazil increased 75% in this period. And in the Amazon, agricultural GDP doubled. It went from 15 billion reais in 2004 to 30 billion reais in 2012. So, and if you consider that 95% of deforestation in the Amazon is illegal, basically it's a criminal act, really, there's no conflict between, the capitalist solutions Rodrigo and others have been advocating, because that's precisely what we saw in the Amazon up to now, up to, a few years back when deforestation started to rise again.
Rodrigo, President Bolsonaro has already rejected an offer of financial help from G7 countries. He accused those countries of treating Brazil like a, quote, colony. He had especially tough words for the French president, Emmanuel Macron. This is what he said. Let's watch this.
Look, first of all, Emmanuel Macron should withdraw the insults he made against me. First, he called me a liar. And then, from the information that I have, he said our sovereignty over the Amazon was an open question. So, in order to talk or accept anything from France, which might be with the best possible intentions, he's going to have to withdraw those words. Then we can talk.
So, Rodrigo, what do you make of that response from President Bolsonaro?
Yeah, I think he has a point. Macron, he's the one being very opportunistic about all that. Actually, he wants to be seen as a global leader, and also he wants to probably destroy the Mercosur and European Union deal, because he wants to protect the farmers in France. They are not competitive against Brazil. I don't buy into all those alarmists, ecological alarmists like Al Gore and all that. I think they've been wrong mostly of the time, and also they are using the environment and the global warming issue to support a kind of global government. If you just look at the Green New Deal that Ocasio-Cortez and the Democratic Party proposed in US, like it's a Stalinist deal. So it doesn't make sense. They want a global government. They want to go after our sovereignty. And I would recommend our listeners to read the article of Leandro Narlock in Wall Street Journal about how to develop Amazon.
Okay.
I don't think we've been doing it. I don't think actually we've been accepting capitalism developing there.
So, Sweta, we just heard it. Ecological alarmists and Stalinists.
It is this type of rhetoric that is so dangerous for the future of the planet. It is exactly this kind of thing that is short-sighted by the current administration of the Brazilian government that is going to result in real long-term peril, not just for the government and the country, its citizens, the indigenous people, but also everyone who has a stake of needing to be able to comfortably survive in a future and adapt to a future that we know is rapidly changing. To call the reality of this science that has over 99% consensus alarmist is extremely irresponsible. And I urge those viewing this to not pay attention to that inaccurate statement.
Felipe, environmentalists and climate change experts say there is abundant evidence that these fires are being caused by humans, mainly cattle ranchers in that part of Brazil. What do you know about that?
It's precisely that. And the fires that we're seeing now, they started to be produced in June or in the beginning of the year. There are a lot of illegal gold mining invading indigenous land, deforesting indigenous land. So deforestation came before, as Claudio has explained, before the fires. So when we're all aware of the climate effects of the fires, we should also be aware of the humanitarian catastrophe that's happening in the Amazon. Genocide of indigenous people, lots of violence against environmentalists. We are talking about the country who mostly killed environmental defenders in the entire world. Those environmental defenders are not ranchers. The ranchers are killing environmental defenders. Ranchers are killing indigenous people. That's what is happening in the Amazon today. There's a lot of social struggles in the Amazon behind those fires. This we should look very carefully to that. So how to behave also. When we're talking about, is Macron being colonialist? I'm sure he is. But Bolsonaro is being extremely colonialist and racist inside Brazil. He is attacking indigenous people who are the ones leading the protection of the Amazon. We should listen to them. We should listen to the Xikrin, who a few days ago just kicked out 300 invaders from their land. It's a humanitarian crisis in the Amazon associated with the ecological crisis.
Claudio, to Felipe's point about the humanitarian consequences of what is happening in the Amazon right now, what impact is this deforestation having on indigenous communities in that part of Brazil?
Well, I can give you another figure. This is published research. It was published in Science magazine a few years ago, I guess 2015. One awful effect of fires, I'm not talking about deforestation right now, just fires, is that some Amazonian cities and indigenous villages get a very high air pollution level. During the peak of the burning season, some cities in the Amazon are most polluted than São Paulo. And this piece of research that was done a few years ago by Brazilian and British researchers showed that the effort that Brazil did to reduce deforestation saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives, people who would have died premature deaths through air pollution. So this is one, just to give you one example.
Okay, Rodrigo, I know you want to respond to what you've just heard. Go ahead.
No, I just mean follow the money, because there are no consensus about that support the alarmism of Al Gore and the likes. They've been wrong a lot of the times, and listen, there are thousands of NGOs in Amazon. They have interest in keeping the situation like this. Like the slogan says, farms here, forests there. European countries destroy their forests, and now they just want to keep Brazilian forests because they know we have a competitive advantage in terms of farming. So that's what it's all about.
All right.
The Amazon forest has been burning for decades now, and suddenly they are all aware of it because Bolsonaro is in power.
All right, well, I have a scientist sitting with me here. Let me ask her about what you've just said. Is that a fair comparison, that Europeans burnt down forests to create farmland?
The idea is that every country, these arbitrary political borders, have natural resources that have been exploited for economic gain. And you see developing countries looking to the past and looking to the prosperity of what the West has experienced, wanting to do the same thing. The luxury of that model we do not have anymore. So while there are resources that deserve to be benefited from the citizenry that is most politically bordered within close to that resource, that doesn't mean we can exploit them. So what we need to do is find really courageous global leadership that is willing to come up with incentives for countries like Brazil to get paid a dividend perhaps, or whatever really makes the most sense, so there is economic gain to be had from protecting a natural resource that happens to fall within their borders that benefits all of us.
But I guess the challenge also, Sweta, is the point that Rodrigo made earlier on, and that is, how does a country like Brazil develop economically and at the same time preserve its forests?
I mean, that is the question that G7 really could have grappled with, and it was an embarrassment that Trump left that seat vacant, because ultimately there wasn't that consensus from the global leadership that really came up with that plan. Just to give relief and recovery funds, $20 million is a drop in the bucket. We need to invest hundreds of millions and really identify what incentive really would work to make this a win-win situation for the country of Brazil, which very much deserves to have economic gain and benefit, but again, not at the peril of long-term disaster for the country itself and for the world as a whole.
Felipe, President Bolsonaro says he intends making major changes to Brazil's environment policies, including opening up the Amazon to farming and other development. How are those plans being received in Brazil?
With great revolt. We are aware that this represents the destruction of the Amazon. I think we should look very seriously to the interests behind the fires in the Amazon, such as U.S. American mining companies' interest in exploiting the Amazon, or the CEO of Blackstone, one of top financiers of Trump, who is driving deforestation in the Amazon. We have a lot of international interests in the Amazon, of course, I'm sure, but we cannot blame the NGOs or the Indians. This is ridiculous. This is pure hoax. We should take very seriously what's happening in the Amazon. So international interest in the Amazon, we should look at them very seriously. Where is China now? China buys like half of the soya production in the Amazon. We should listen to the Chinese government. What's their opinion about what's happening here? As the Norwegian government has already pronounced themselves, who are driving deforestation in the Amazon? Pig iron industries, big mining companies. What Bolsonaro is trying to do is open the Amazon for destruction in order that he believes with that, after the forest is gone, you have political control of the Amazon. That's pure political.
Right. Claudio, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that President Bolsonaro has taken some action right now. He has banned legal fires for the next 60 days. But the point is, in a country like Brazil, a vast country, these fires are taking place in remote places in the Amazon. How do you enforce a ban like that?
Well, first of all, it's sort of laughable, the decree issued by Bolsonaro. It would be akin to telling, drug gangs in Rio that they can't use heavy weaponry anymore. If you go and forbid the use of fire in a place where 95% of deforestation is illegal, and you don't have any enforcement action to go along with the decree, that's pretty much useless. And one thing that must be said about Bolsonaro's policy is that he fooled no one, because during the campaign trail, he promised to, dismantle those governance and enforcement structures that were responsible for making people follow the law in the Amazon. And Bolsonaro called those agencies an industry of fines. And so he's dismantled IBAMA, which is the National Environmental Agency in Brazil. He's dismantled the National Park Service. There is an elite squad of IBAMA called GEF. Those guys made 0 operations in the Amazon this year. So really, if you don't get your act together and put those government structures to work along with the prohibition of fires, you're going to get nowhere.
Rodrigo, as Felipe told us a moment ago, the policy changes that President Bolsonaro is considering have been rejected by the Brazilian people. So is he going to go ahead with them, do you think?
I don't agree at all with the premise. I think there are the majority of the people that voted for Bolsonaro wants those changes. Let me tell you something. 13% of Brazilian territory belongs to indigenous people. 13%. And let me repeat those figures. 23 million people live in Amazon, 45% of those below the poverty line. Environmentalists want to keep it that way. At least it sounds like this. Bolsonaro, at least, I have a lot of things to criticize about his government, but at least he wants to change it. And I'm pretty sure the indigenous people agree with him.
Sweta, at least we forget, Brazil is not the only country that, where the Amazon forests exist. There are several countries in Latin America. They're now meeting. Brazil has agreed to accept aid from Chile, but they want to formulate some kind of coordinated response to what is going on right now. What would you like to see happen there?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how that goes next week.
Yep.
What we didn't have was that global leadership, but maybe it'll be different when you have leaders like Colombia's President Ivan Duque, who I had the pleasure of meeting several months back, and he spoke about the importance of biodiversity for Colombia. And I believe that if that type of rhetoric can come out of this convening of the South American leaders that have a real stake in preserving the biodiversity and the important critical role that the Amazon plays, then we might see some real progress. But these leaders alone, Trump, Bolsonaro, are making dangerous moves. And we really need to see global leadership step up and intervene, because quite literally our futures are at stake if we don't.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. As we say goodbye, we leave you with some of the images of the fires burning in the Amazon rainforest. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
A threat that looms over every corner of the earth.
En esta estación seca, de repente comienza a llover. Eso no es así. Anteriormente no llovía.
A solution that might be simpler than we think.
There's something about the tropics, the speed at which you can restructure forests.
Is there the collective willpower to transform our future?
We're going to be okay if we dare to change.
Climate change. This week on Full Frame.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. global business.